Good afternoon, Club 17. Great to be back together again. And for those who are joining on Zoom, welcome. We've got a big crew here in the Continental Room. Haven't been in this room in a long time. And I think you're all going to enjoy the program that we have. So we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now we'll have the invocation and four-way test, and Hux Miller is going to lead us.
Thank you, President Brett. Please bow your heads. Dear Lord, you have made us stewards of your world, both the natural world and the environment and the people who live in the world, especially women, children, the handicapped, widows and orphans. And you've also made us stewards of the culture of the world, the art, the literature, and the architecture left to us by past generations. Help us to be diligent stewards of your world. Amen. And now let us repeat the things that we as Rotarians think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
So please be seated. And thank you, Hux. And we have some guests visiting with us today, and I won't introduce the people who are part of our program today, but we have some other guests here today. We have Tom Zender from Fidelity. He is a guest of Eric Pettaway. Tom, welcome. And we've got Nathan Musgrove from Excelsior Accounting Services. He's a guest of Rick Flynn. Nathan, welcome. And we also have Matthew Davis from Preferred Rate Advisors. He's a guest of Esteban Calle. Matthew, welcome. Great to have you all here. And now we've got a very special part of our program that Gino Colangelo is going to lead us in. It's a memorial to one of our past presidents. So, Gino, let me invite you up front.
Thank you, President Brett. Today we are here to honor and celebrate the life of Mr. Jim Winter. Excuse me. James E. Jimmy Winter was reunited with his wife, his saint of a wife, Gertrude Jean Rickard Winter, on January 16th, 2021, at the age of 92. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Edward V. and Magdalene Winter. Jim was a graduate of St. Mary's School and St. Xavier High School. As the 1945 sports editor of the St. X Prep, he pinned the future nickname, the Bombers. Jim was selected to the 1944 Esquire All-American Baseball team as a sophomore. He served his country in the Korean War Army Division as the second baseman for the Camp Polk baseball team. After 4 years and 5 months of serving his country, he attended Xavier University. Jim was the third-generation president at Winter Insurance Agency. He married Gertrude Jean Rickard on December 27th of 1952. They were blessed with 6 children who are all here with us today. Jim was active in the community, serving as president of the Musketeer Club, which was the year of the demise of football, and the past president of Rotary of Cincinnati. He was an active member of Clover Nook Country Club and was always the weekly nemesis of Dick Wusenbacher. Jim was also a member of St. Vivian Catholic Church for 63 years and served as a great Rotarian for over 62 years. His many jokes and quick wit were passed down to his children, as I mentioned, that are here. Edward Fast Eddie Winter, Lori Michael Ajusky, Andrew Dozy Winter, Michael Chief Winter, the twins, Robert Chester Winter, and Neil Earl Winter. His grandchildren, who refer to him as Pawpaw and Peepaw, Nate, William, Kenna, Rickard Winter, Matt and Tyler Michael Ajusky, Bethany, Sarah, Seth, Luke Winter, Kim Panther, Megan Krull, Emily, Lydia, Gigi, Nicholas, Chase, and Griffin Winter, and great-grandchildren Elise, Charlie, Claire Michael Ajusky, Elliot and Emma Jo Winter, and Rowan Panther. He was also Uncle Peepers to Jim and Charlie and Tommy Cutter and brother-in-law Tommy Allen. Besides his loving and devoted wife Gertrude Rickard Winter, he was preceded in death by his parents Edward V. and Magdalene Winter, sister Joan Ellen Allen, in-laws Marion Cutler, James B. and Robert J. Rickard, and Billy Jean Baker Townsend. With that, if we could bow our heads for a moment of silence in honor of Mr. Winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Gino, and we're very glad to have Jim Winter's family with us today. Thank you for joining us. And we want to pay tribute to long-term members who've passed, people who've served this club so well over many years, over decades. It's now, in terms of where we are with the pandemic, we're at a place we've been able to start doing that. So again, thank you, Gino, for a wonderful tribute, and welcome again to Jim Winter's family. Thank you for being here today. So, as you know, on a different topic, we've had a number of members of our club who've wanted to sponsor meetings, and we appreciate the sponsorship. Today, one of those companies, a corporate member of our club, Cornerstone Retirement Advisors, is here as our sponsor. And Mackenzie, do you want me to turn things over to you at this point? You all know Rotarian Mackenzie Bennett.
Hey, thanks, Brett. So most of you guys know me from our service projects or just from some fun times we've had over the years, but I don't think some of you guys know what I do. So I help clients protect their assets for their legacy. So we'll be actually hearing from our speaker today about architecture. And one of the first steps in building any kind of structure is to lay a strong foundation. Financial planning is really no different. Having the right policy in place can mean the difference between a successful retirement and one that could possibly fail. I know planning for the death of a loved one or what could happen if you get injured and can't work isn't the most fun conversation, but it could be one of the most important ones that you have. As my grandfather used to tell me, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you haven't reviewed your plan for life, long-term care, disability insurance, or how your portfolio would perform in volatile markets, come see us in our booth outside. And we also are giving away a portfolio binder as well as a nice thermos. So stop by and sign up for the raffle. Thanks, Brett.
Yep, and thanks again to Cornerstone Retirement Advisors. A few announcements this week. Our club is really active. I mean, we've been doing many, many things, but I'll get to that in a minute. Let's start with some birthdays. May 19th, Dean Gauden and Chip Carson. May 20th, today, Kent Lutz, Lynn Smith Migliera, Kevin Potts, May 23rd, Kelly Mann, and May 24th, Tom Ruthman. Let's wish them, hey, by the way, who's in the audience today, if you'd stand up? Okay, stand up. We wish you all a happy birthday, and for those joining on Zoom as well. And just a word of thank you. A number of people in our club have been able to participate in the professional development series this year. There's been 4 different seminars that were given. The last one of the series was last week. Terry Dean is our committee chair for professional development. I just want to say thank you for a good series of 4 development programs this year. And a number of us had a chance to be at Camp Allen last Saturday for a spring workday. We did a lot of good things. I don't think we did too much damage. I think we did a lot more help than damage. But a lot of mulching, a lot of painting, clearing brush. It was wonderful to be at Camp Allen. And I also want to say Fred Fisher gave us an orientation in terms of where the new property is, the 55 or so additional acres that we were able to purchase through the effort of Fred, but many, many people I won't thank. We will certainly give them even more thanks as we go. But having said that, who was at the workday last Saturday? Why don't you stand up for a minute? Thank you. Always great to be at Camp Allen. And now we're going to do something fun. We're going to do split the pot. So I'm going to ask our speaker, Liz Riorden. We're going to... This room is a little hard because you're reaching around. It's not quite as easy. Oh, my goodness. I know he's here. Hux Miller. Okay. So, Hux, you get 13. Okay. Ace of Diamonds. We're looking for the Queen of Hearts. So, right now, the accumulating pot today was $771. It'll keep accumulating. Hux, you get $30 as the weekly prize for having your name pulled, but your name will go back into the grand drawing. We'll keep it going, and I think the pot will get more and more attractive. So we have some fun things going on. Rotary Euchre. I know Bob and Joyce McElroy hosted a great Euchre event. Hi, Joyce. I see you here, too. And that was just a few weeks ago. There's going to be the second Euchre night will be hosted by Jerry and Nancy Reese, and it'll be this coming Tuesday night. A lot of fun in terms of socializing, eating, drinking, playing cards, and playing cards is in there, by the way. People come from all around greater Cincinnati to be part of these Euchre nights. Very great social time. You can bring a snack or sweet treat to share, and whatever you'd like to drink. And if you might be euchred, it's happened to me, bring some quarters. You need some quarters. But should be a fun event. If you'd like to be part of it Tuesday night, let Nancy Reese know. Raise your hand, Nancy. So very good. And save the date. You all know Molly Wellman, the cocktail expert of Cincinnati. We are going to be doing a special prospective member event, our first prospective member event of the year, and it'll be at Japs OTR, her restaurant. She will be crafting and demonstrating a cocktail especially designed for Club 17. So save the date. It's Tuesday, June 15th from 5 to 7 p.m. Think about who might be interested in learning more about Rotary and just having a fun social time. Bring a guest, bring a prospective member. If you do, there's a special bonus. You and your guest will each get to take home a kit to make the specialty cocktail that she's designed. So if you're interested, contact Membership Director Deanne Fleming. Deanne, you're here. Yep, raise your hand. So looks like a fun event. And we just talked about the Camp Allen project. we've got another project coming up June 19th. And you know, this is the first year that we've done an environmental sustainability project. We are going to be doing this project at Gamble Montessori Elementary School in Westwood. Exciting opportunity. Again, it'll be Saturday, June 19th. It'll just be the morning, not all day long. It'll be to take what they call a bench circle area where they do some outdoor education and kind of renovate it, get it back in good shape. It's used as an outdoor classroom. Also to help build or create a trail into the woods for part of their nature observation and exploration program. So great opportunity for our club to help students, to help young students, and create something that could be a lasting environmental sustainability project, something very educational. So if you're interested in that, is Jody DeVoyd here today? Jody, okay. Jody is the project leader, and just see Jody again for June 19th. And now we have a special presentation, and I'd like to turn things over to Mackenzie Bennett, if you could lead us through that.
So I've got something a little bit more exciting than insurance. So Chief, if you want to go ahead and come up here. So as most of you guys know, our Firefighter Appreciation Event is typically in the fall. Well, we've got a little bit of a special occasion here. Fire Chief Winston is retiring as of August 21, the official date. Of course, he's leaving us for greener pastures to Florida here in just about a week, he said, I think. So obviously I don't need to tell you guys this, but we as Rotarians love serving others in the community. So when we heard that you were retiring, and we couldn't pass up the chance to honor one of our local heroes who's dedicated so much of your life to serving the community. So I'd like to present you with this certificate for devoted and unselfish service above self, as well, and I think this is pretty good, the Flying Pig Rotary pen from Cincinnati. So Chief, we wish you the best of luck in retirement.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and it's always a pleasure to have you here, Chief. We love that. Wish you all the best in retirement. And just a word about next week's meeting. It'll be Wally Emerling Award Day, a great meeting. Please plan to join us for that in person if you can, or on Zoom. And now I'd like to switch gears and talk about today's program. Oh, I'd have one other update, a member in the news, an update we just got this morning. Our member, Dr. Charles Pierce, is in the hospital. We just found this out. His wife, Barbara, called Christy this morning. He's in cardio ICU. He's awaiting a valve replacement surgery next week. So please keep Charles Pierce in your thoughts and prayers. For switching to today's program, we're very pleased to have with us Liz Riorden. And Liz is an associate professor of architecture from the University of Cincinnati. You're going to speak on rebuilding Notre Dame Cathedral. Well, what a wonderful topic, and I think a number of us have had a chance to see Notre Dame Cathedral. Love to hear that. Liz is an architect by training. Went to Columbia to get her master's in architecture, was an architect in New York City. But in 1990, she returned to an earlier career passion she had in archaeology. And she did a lot of very specialized work in an excavation in northwest Turkey on Troy. And that Troy excavation led to probably 2 decades or more of your work and research. And as part of that, with an opportunity, having worked with some people who were very, very well known in the field, one of them was at the University of Cincinnati. And in 2002, Liz adjusted her career path and became a full-time academic teaching at the University of Cincinnati School of Architecture and Interior Design. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Rome and a member of the International Council on Monuments and Sites. She's pursued a number of other archaeological projects that I won't list, but feel free to talk about any that you'd like, Liz. She is from Western Massachusetts, from the Berkshires, for those who love skiing and the outdoors, a nice area, and has lived, as I said, in New York City, but also in the past has lived in Germany as part of her work. Please join me in welcoming Liz Riorden to the Rotary Club of Cincinnati.
It's a little high. How's the sound? Okay, very good. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm really, really happy to be here. This is, since the pandemic began, this is really my first chance to do what I'm used to doing, which is standing in front of a room with quite a lot of people talking about what I love, which is architecture. And so it feels great to be back. So I am going to talk about Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. I think we can all remember that day. It's now been 2 years, 1 month, and 5 days, or 6 days, since this happened. And we can probably think about one of those, this is what I was doing at that moment that I heard about this, except the whole thing got eclipsed by everything that happened in the past year and a half. But hopefully we'll start to go back to a more normal situation and we'll think more on some of these things. So I never lost sight of Notre Dame Cathedral because I'm very interested in how the rebuilding program goes forward as a member of ICOMOS International and as an architect who has worked one of those many archaeological sites I worked at involved a Gothic cathedral, which I studied for many decades. So I'll just tell you the story of where I was at that moment, April 15th, 2019. I was in my office up at campus. My phone rang. It was my younger sister in upstate New York, and she said, "You better pay attention to the news right now because Notre Dame is on fire." And I said, "What?" So I immediately took a look. We're still on the phone. And I said to her, "You know what? This is not going to be all that bad. The roof is going to burn off. There might be some problems with a bit of the vaulting, but it's not going to be that bad." And she said to me, because she's my younger sister, she said, "You are horrible. How can you say that? This is terrible. The whole building is going to burn to the ground. You know, it's a great monument, one of the many great things in Paris. We had seen it together several times. And how can you say that? You're a horrible person." And I said, "No, I'm not a horrible person. I just know quite a bit about Gothic buildings and how they were built and what kind of abuse they can survive." The thing is lighting up, but it's not turning. I think if you just hit enter or up arrow or, there we go. Okay, sorry for that little glitch. So here's what I said to her, and I'm sure her eyes started to blur over, but I have at least a graphic here. This is a town, 50 miles from Paris in northern France called Sens, and the cathedral there was a very interesting case, and this is very well documented. It caught on fire. The whole city burned because the fire spread. It was a windy day. And the whole building didn't burn down, though. These are stone buildings, so they are fire resistant. I've got a fire chief here. I did not know that was going to happen. But the buildings were designed. It was understood that they would burn down. They were designed to last a long time, and over the course of many centuries, actually lightning was the biggest problem back then. Not a problem for us today, but that was a problem then. So the building caught caught on fire. It was a notorious case. Interestingly enough, after that incident happened in 1184, the way they built these buildings changed a bit, and that was probably in response to this notorious fire. What we think of typically for Notre Dame, Paris, with the flying buttresses and those very tall stained glass windows and the arching vaulting, stone vaulting on the inside, and all of that really came to be after this disaster. This was not the only reason, there were other reasons, but this certainly contributed to it. And I'm going to now tell you why this was significant to my initial thoughts about rebuilding Notre Dame. Next. So my next series of slides, I know some of you in the audience are probably engineers, and you'll really understand what I'm saying, but for everybody, this is going to be a little review of why Gothic structures are so amazing and so worthy of study. If any of my students were here, I'd be looking at them. So these buildings have a double roof ceiling system. The stone vaults are not the same as the roof. And the stone vaults really have an uptick after this disaster at Cathedral, because one of their purposes, and what happened at Notre Dame just now illustrates this beautifully, was to be a fire break. So they knew the roof would get struck by lightning and catch on fire, and they knew the roof would burn because they're heavy timber structures, usually with sheet lead roofing, something like that. Some of them have tile roofing. It was okay for the roof to burn as long as the whole building didn't burn. And so the vaulting acted as a kind of fire break. And this drawing shows the construction process where you can see the timbers of the roof structure while the masons are laying the stones of the vaulting. And you're looking way, way, way down below you is the floor of the cathedral. This is a generic cathedral. Next. And so at Notre Dame in Paris, actually, they may already have been discussing this problem because it was a perennial problem. And that's when most of the nave vaulting at Paris was built, right around this time. So it was in everybody's mind. Next one. Just a little Gothic Cathedral 101 to just review. So these are some of the parts. This is a cross-section through a typical Gothic cathedral with the appropriate parts. Next one. And then now I'm going to get into engineer speak a little bit. So, of course, it's a large, tall building. It's made out of stone. It's very weighty. So one of the things you'll notice, of course, it needs massive foundations. Some of the collapses, notorious collapses, were because the foundations were insufficient. So the building has to resist gravity, but more than that, next one. It's a true compression masonry structure where you have all of these vaults, which are a kind of arch in 3 dimensions. And so those are exerting outward thrust, which has to be countered by something pushing back. And that's what all those buttresses are doing, flying and otherwise. And the whole thing is very symmetrical too, that helps. In this part of France, by the way, they were not worried about earthquake, but they had some other lateral forces. Next slide to think about. I'll get to that one. Here's just some plans of typical Gothic cathedrals. So the symmetry and the arrangement of the buttresses versus the vaults is a system. It's a systematic way of resisting this outward thrust because of the type of building you are doing, which is compression masonry, true compression masonry building. Next one. So you have the buttresses counteracting the outward thrust of the vaults, and you also have lateral forces such as wind. As these roofs got taller and the cathedrals kept getting taller and taller, of course, those lateral forces were greater, and some of the damage over the years to some of these buildings has been from probably wind. This is a problem with Notre Dame going back 20 years because of climate change, actually. There have been some windstorms of exceptional nature which have caused some deformation, not caused by the fire. I'll point that out in a slide coming up. Next one. So Notre Dame is Notre Dame in Paris. By the way, there's many churches of Notre Dame, cathedrals of Notre Dame in France. They're the Virgin Mary, Notre Dame, Our Lady. So I always tell my students, don't get confused one from the other. Chartres Cathedral is also Notre Dame. But Notre Dame Paris is really an interesting building in terms of the development of the Gothic. It went through an earlier phase, which is not what you see now when you go there. But they were trying to solve this problem of being a bit taller than the typical. So this is from Laude Cathedral. This is like the typical early Gothic cathedral. And this is Notre Dame by comparison. So they were more ambitious. They wanted it to be taller. They wanted it to have more flying buttresses. They excavated in the 19th century to find out about this building. It's one of the best documented buildings in the world, by the way, so this will help the rebuilding. They found that the foundations were 30 feet deep. So they were understanding that there was going to be lateral forces and other additional forces on the building by going up taller. Nothing to do with what happened to the building, though. Next. And by the way, I'll just mention Victor Hugo very briefly because, of course, he was one of the people who knew the building really well. And we might think that he loved the building. He thought it was a paradigm of the Gothic. Actually not, and that's not what he said. What he said is the building is a curious specimen of the variety, and that's because, like most medieval buildings, it shows different phases, and the columns are still very kind of stumpy compared to later Gothic cathedrals. And we have this oculus window sometimes up here, and it has more complex vaulting. The vaults that did collapse, by the way, are going to be this one. So it's actually a much more interesting and complex building than you might think superficially. Let's go on. Okay, so what happened that day? I was more concerned about what I call the second firestorm, because almost immediately, we're all glued to social media, and I started to see the most, actually very competent media organizations just spouting nonsense about what had happened, what was going to happen, and so on. I call that the second firestorm, and I was not alone in that. Next slide. Because the very next day in my inbox came a email from ICOMOS International explaining this. The media has echoed various controversies. This climate does not facilitate the calm and trusting environment necessary for professionals of the heritage field as well as policymakers to deal with the situation. So basically what they were telling members was ICOMOS France is going to be the lead on this. We are advising President Macron, and here you see him, Emmanuel Macron, meeting with UNESCO officials to say, this was just a few days after the fire, to say, okay, what can we do to rebuild? Macron, of course, has been criticized for saying that Mass can be held in 2024. He's absolutely right. There's no reason why that won't happen. Next. So just to backtrack a little, because I'm throwing out this name, ICOMOS, it's the International Council on Monuments and Sites is what it stands for. No one really knows how to pronounce it. It's an international organization, so everyone pronounces it differently. But this is kind of a diagram showing how United Nations, through UNESCO, which was founded at the same time, I think everyone knows what UNESCO is, sponsor all kinds of World Heritage advancement, public relations. There's some amount of money involved, but not a lot. It's more making people aware, making people care, being the arm of the United Nations that cares about these things. As well, there's the World Monuments Fund, a separate organization, but they work together. And I have worked on projects in all of these gray boxes. Next. So, just to clarify, Notre Dame of Paris, Notre Dame's Cathedral, Paris, is part of World Heritage, on the World Heritage list, only by virtue of being part of this one, which is called the banks of the Seine River, the Rive de la Seine. Here's Notre Dame way down here. People are confused because Notre Dame Cathedral in Reims, France, is by itself a tripartite World Heritage monument. So people assure me, no, Notre Dame is a World Heritage monument by itself. No, it is not. But by virtue of being in this absolutely centrally located part of Paris, so essential to the history of Paris and everything, it's a World Heritage monument. Yep. So when it happened, though, in this months immediately afterward, the architectural community as well responded, not just the World Heritage community and heritage management community, and there were some really interesting proposals. For example, this one, to put a steel and glass structure and have basically a botanical garden inside up on the roof. They actually already have an apiary. They're keeping bees on the roof of Notre Dame. And one of the things that happened after the fire was they recovered the swarm and managed to salvage them. But if there was a poll in France that said 55% of French people want the church, the cathedral, to be restored as it was before, I agree with that completely. And the reasons are not because of nostalgia. There are very good, solid reasons. One of which, I think if we go to the next slide, that'll help illustrate it. So here's the terrible fire, the burning of the roof. Actually, water does more damage than fire after this situation because the building is now vulnerable to water getting into the walls, and this is very damaging for any masonry building, as many of you know who probably have basements or houses with first stories of brick like mine. And so it's absolutely necessary, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many architects in the heritage field, to get the thing with a roof back on it as soon as possible. So if you tried to have a very cutting-edge, new, interesting design, I totally approve of the idea, but in fact, it would slow the whole process down. And so I believe that everyone has made the right decision to restore it exactly as it was. And by the way, the spire, you may also have heard about that. This collapsing of the spire is what caused the worst damage, because the weight of the collapsing spire collapsed the vaults in the center. And that's where the worst damage to the building happened. That spire was added in the 19th century by Viollet-le-Duc, one of the great architects and restorers of the 19th century. This was his drawing. He was really a hot pencil. This guy knew how to draw. That is his idea of not Notre Dame, but his ideal Gothic cathedral with this big spire in the middle. So one of the debates has been, do we restore the spire? It wasn't there in the 13th, 12th centuries when the building was first built. But the idea is to restore it exactly as it was on April 15th, 2019, plus in better shape. Next one. So here's Macron looking very concerned, but I think he can probably be happy that the decisions have been made to build it as it was. Plus, it's an iconic building. With an iconic building, it's a little more of a sensitivity towards restoring it rather than just replacing it with something completely new. Next one. So I was very happy. I worked actually on some nominations for the biannual, is it biannual, every 2 years, World Monuments Fund watch list, and was very happy that Notre Dame Paris ended up being on the list. These are some other sites of heritage, many of them in the US actually, that made it onto the list. They pick 25 sites, they get 250 nominations. Members have to review the nominations, and they pick 25 to go ahead with. So a little bit of money, a trickle of money is coming in from World Monuments Fund through this. Next. So now I'm going to answer the question that I know you're all wondering. Actually, the consolidation phase has ended. It's been complete, it's been done. They're ready to now move on to phase 2, which is the rebuilding. It's in progress. That cost 197 million US dollars, which is fairly reasonable if you think about the complexity of it. But the ongoing phase has been estimated, and I got this from Reuters, at 8 billion US dollars. I think that's probably more money than it's going to be. They came up with that number by comparing it to a current project for the Houses of Parliament in England, which is a completely different animal, much larger building, so by square footage basis alone, I really don't think, well, I'm suspicious that this number is a bit of an overestimate, but that's for everything, including restoring the organ, any of the artworks that got smoke damage, stuff like that. Donations are gladly accepted. The owner of the building, by the way, is the government of France. That's why Macron looks so worried. It's his building, he owns it. He's got to fix it. And so you can go directly to the French government website, or there's a Friends group, Friends of Notre Dame de Paris, or to the World Monuments Fund and give money more generally for that. So in the meantime, millions and millions of dollars have been pledged for this project. Next. So here we are during the consolidation. They had to build all these wood armatures to keep the buttresses from collapsing, because without the roof, the whole building gets out of whack. It gets out of balance. These buildings are built as very balanced structures. I believe that this masonry damage was old, caused 20 years ago by a very bad windstorm. So they just have to keep it in check. This was the scaffolding because there was an ongoing restoration project going on. That's what caused the fire. By the way, a workman dropped a cigarette, I believe is what happened. Or wiring, something like that. Right, fire chief, those are the usual kinds of things that happen. This scaffolding, of course, burned in the intense heat of the fire, and they were very worried 6 months ago about delicately removing all that burnt scaffolding without causing further damage to the building. That got done. It got done, there was no damage, and so they were ready to go ahead. Next. Yeah, and this was just to remind us the kinds of pressures that these buildings are under. Next. So that got done in November, the final removing of the scaffold. You still see it in this image, which was Time magazine, I believe, taken sometime about a year ago. Then they could remove the burned wreckage of the wooden timber structure and go on to the next phase, which will include eventually replacing the vaulting here. Next. And so I believe this is my last slide. They have decided that it's going to be important that the next generation of artisans, whether they're stonemasons or heavy timber constructors, know how to take care of these buildings. In countries like Spain, there remains a cadre of artisans who still know how to do this work. In France, a little bit less so in recent decades. So this project has a real silver lining to it. They actually have been cutting down the wood, the oak trees, to build the heavy timbers for the roof. And they're using traditional axes and other equipment. So in other words, not only are they rebuilding it, but they're not using 21st century methods to rebuild it. Although, of course, we get a boost. Computerization, for example, definitely helps. They're rebuilding it with the manners and methods of 500, 600 years ago, which is fascinating. So I believe that in 2024, yes, it will be possible to have Mass in the cathedral. And I don't know if I left time for any questions. Okay, great. I went through that really, really fast, so I'm happy to try to clarify anything. Yes.
The reason for the vault collapsing?
Yeah, so what happened was
Repeat the question, Liz.
Excuse me?
Just repeat it about the vault.
Right, because you don't have a microphone. The question was, why did the spire cause the vault to collapse, the collapsing spire? The spire was made out of wood covered with lead, so it's very heavy. And it was a dynamic force when it collapsed. I think if we could go back a few images to one where we see the spire about to collapse. That one, for example. Here's the spire we're talking about. It's right over the center crossing of the church, of the cathedral. And so that was a dynamic weight coming down on those vaults, which already had some problem. They'd been worked on in the 19th century. And so that was a dynamic force, which it couldn't resist. So that's the one place where the vaulting did collapse, and that will have to be rebuilt. Yes, they're planning to rebuild. Interestingly enough, they chose to rebuild the spire because it's part of the iconic look of the building, and it will be made out of wood with lead. Lead, of course, is a problem for environmental reasons, so I'll be interested to find out if it's lead, yes, but handled in this way, or perhaps in this one case with the roofing material, there will be a substitute material. I don't know about that yet.
So Liz, and I know we've got questions in the room, but we also have questions coming in from people on Zoom. They're texting them to me. Here's a question from Deborah Schultz. First of all, she says, Liz, thank you for coming. Really interesting. How do nations like France and Italy manage to financially support their World Heritage sites?
Yeah, it's an ongoing problem, which the pandemic has made very clear certain aspects. So Italy, for example, a huge part of their gross domestic product is tourism, which has been derailed. And probably through taxation. I don't know if any of you went to Florence or Rome, Italy recently. You paid a big room tax. Part of that money probably went for heritage restoration programs. They have so much stuff. That's just one small way that this stuff gets taken care of. I would say the larger issue is cultural. It matters to them. They care about them. I find it very interesting. I hope that poll was really well done and true, that 55% of French people wanted the building restored as it was because they understood that it had a life, it had an existence as an iconic French monument. But it's always an ongoing problem. And yeah, you could write a bunch of books on that subject, so Deborah keeps asking me that question. I don't know why. She wants me to have a definitive answer, and there just simply isn't one. Yes?
With the Gothic vault was a development of the barrel vault. Was the barrel vault sort of Romanesque?
Yes.
And so what do you call the Gothic vault?
Okay, we have a very architectural historical question. What's the difference between the barrel vault, which preceded the pointed Gothic vault, or groin vaulting as we call it? But what's the difference between the two of them? The barrel vault is by necessity very heavy and caused the building to be very dark inside because you had to have so much mass of building holding in that outward thrust. The groin vaulting of the Gothic buildings was really an attempt by stonemasons to figure out how to make the wall thinner and have more openings in it so you could get more light, and then of course they have the fabulous stained glass windows. And the groin vaulting, the vector is a bit different, more vertical because of the shape of it with the pointed arch, but you can have flat, regular arch groin vaulting. But they liked that more vertical vector because they could attenuate the structure. It looked thinner, it looked more skeletal, and that was the whole look they were going after. Yes.
I have let me just get one from Zoom first, from Mark Romito. He said, how did the government end up owning Notre Dame? I would have thought it belonged to the church.
That's a really great question. Well, in France, if you know your French history, remember back to the French Revolution and all of that. So they have a very secular society. Therefore, they determined, I think more than 150, maybe 200 years ago, that the government of France owned the churches and cathedrals. Maybe not all of them, but certainly the iconic ones. Yes?
Liz, are you aware
As far as I know, maybe you could go to that slide with the very damaged parts. Go forwards. Stop. Yes, this one. There's a bit of damage there. That worries me. As far as I know, the only place where a substantial amount of masonry will have to be replaced is the crossing vaults, but there was also damage to the transept upper rose windows. And this was something that drove me crazy in the days after this all happened, was people would post images of the fire behind the upper rose window in the transept. I don't know which image shows it the best, which you don't even see from inside the church. You only see it from inside the roof. And said, oh, the great rose window of Paris, which is normally the west-facing one between the two towers, is being destroyed. Well, that's not the case. It was the upper transept rose window. It got damaged. The stained glass got damaged. They may have to replace some of that masonry. It looked pretty badly damaged. But a lot of it is quite okay. The towers, especially the west facade. The buttresses. I think they're able to salvage the original masonry of all the flying buttresses. Yes?
You mentioned restoring it to its original condition. How do you prevent a future fire from happening and moving forward?
Well, first,
Using
yeah.
10th century technology, how do you prevent something like this in the future?
Okay, the question was how do we prevent a fire in the future and why all this not using current technology? Of course we use some current technology. I think for more than 100 years there was first gas lighting and then electric lighting in the church. So it's not true that we restore it completely to that phase. And so since the 19th century there have been lightning rods on the building, and that's why Viollet-le-Duc thought he could get away with that spire. I think a fire suppression system would be great. And I suppose it's feasible, and maybe that's part of the $8 billion cost. But heavy timbers, by the way, any of you engineers know this, heavy timbers are considered to be a fairly good fire-rated structure because they burn so slowly before they start to totally collapse. But that was a very hot fire. Yeah.
I'm just curious, so, you know, in the 19th century, what excuse did they have for messing with a 6th century old building by adding a spire that was evidently a bad idea?
You are absolutely right. And again, if you know the other projects by Eugène Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc, he was quite a character. He got kicked out of the École des Beaux-Arts, the premier architecture school, because he refused to teach the orthodoxy. He was basically a very prickly person. He actually stated, well, in French, so this is paraphrase, that the role of the restoration architect was to create a building better than the original had ever been. Now, this is not current best practice. We don't do this. But he spent decades in France doing that, and some of our favorite things we go to see when we are tourists there were just inventions of his mind. Carcassonne in southern France, if any of you have been there, is totally, well, all the roof structures, the walls were all there, but not the roofs, totally invented by Viollet-le-Duc. So at the time, that was considered okay practice, and the French loved it.
It's good. Well, we'll take one more question. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm curious if during the French Revolution or World War II or any other conflicts in the last 1,000 years, if any of the old buildings like the Cathedral were damaged or destroyed completely.
The question is, how many of them still remain, or how many are rebuilt completely?
History that shows that they've been destroyed?
You mean?
Was there any damage to this one that was repaired in the past?
Oh, yes, for sure there was. But I don't know of a really bad fire before, but for sure there was damage. That really bad windstorm 20 years ago, because I was in Europe at the time, you know, it blew some of the gargoyles, the famous gargoyles, off of Notre Dame. And that led to repairs. And I believe that probably the current restoration project that was in place before the fire was a result of not just neglect, but the wind damage. Sorry. You okay? She's thinking about the smoke from the fire. Okay, I'm happy to hang around and answer more questions on a more personal level, but I think I've run out of time.
You did, hey, great job. Great. Stay up here for 1 minute if you would. So, thank you, Liz, for a great presentation. And it was great that we had time for a number of questions, and thank you for being willing to stay longer to take some more. But we really appreciate it. And I know for me it was a real education just to see that. And I also know that Chief Winston is probably thinking of some consulting in Paris at this point. So, but thank you. That was really a great talk. And before you go, I just want to say, in appreciation for you speaking to our club today, we are going to make a donation to the Rotary International End Polio Now campaign in your honor. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you.
One more thing. And our Rotary theme this year is that Rotary opens opportunities, and that's what our club is focused on and has been for decades. And Liz, you've opened a lot of opportunities. We didn't even have time to talk about what you've done in archaeology, but you've opened up so many opportunities for archaeology students and for architecture students. It's fascinating. So thank you for what you've done as a teacher and educator. This is a pin that we give in your honor. So just a reminder, next Thursday, Wally Emmerling Day, please join us in person or on Zoom. And you know, I don't know about you, but yesterday felt like summer to me. So I'm going to wish everybody a summer-type weekend this weekend. Meeting adjourned. Hope to see you next week.